Hi there, my name is Seth Logan and I'm a coastal engineer with SJL Engineering. Today I'm going to present a few slides on the flooding hazard limit for the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority Coastal Hazard Mapping Update Project. Partners on this project are Zuzek Inc., SJL Engineering, and DHI. And so the flooding hazard is one of three provincially regulated shoreline hazards for Great Lakes shorelines throughout Ontario. The other two being the erosion hazard, the dynamic beach hazard, which are both subjects of other presentations which you can find on the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority website. Now the flooding hazard obviously is meant to incorporate all areas along the shoreline that may be susceptible to flooding during the 100-year planning horizon. And these photographs here sort of depict a number of shoreline communities that were flooded. Many of these photos from 2017 to 2020 on the Great Lakes when we had record high water supplies across all Great Lakes. A couple of these photos in black and white here show a major storm event that impacted the Lake St. Clair, Tecumseh, Windsor area shoreline in the 1970s. Really illustrate the threat of flooding on the Great Lakes. Of course, we're here to talk about the Maitland Valley shoreline, which is not immune to flooding itself, particularly in these last number of years, 2019, 2020. We had record lake levels across many of the Great Lakes, and we certainly experienced flooding in the Maitland Valley region. These photographs here are from a major storm event that occurred on October 31st through November 1st, 2019. Top left photo here is the water treatment plant in Goderich, right on the shoreline. You can see the flooded parking lot, and in each of these photos, significant flooding occurring a significant distance from the shoreline inland. And it's all of these areas that are prone to flooding at these extreme lake levels, coupled with storm events that we're aiming to capture with the flooding hazard. So what is the flooding hazard? Well, the flooding hazard is defined as the 100-year flood level plus an allowance for wave uprush and other water-related hazards. And that definition comes from the provincial policy statement, which was last issued in 2020, but it also shows up in a number of other policy documents throughout Ontario, including each of the individual conservation authority regulations. And so to determine what the flooding hazard should be, we need to evaluate each of these components. And the first one is the 100-year flood level. Now the historical 100-year flood level is defined as the maximum instantaneous still water level with a probability of occurrence of 1% in any given year. And that's based on historical data. Now the flood level is a combination of two things. It's a combination of the static lake level across the lake, so in this case Lake Huron, and also the effects of local storm surge. So when we have a big wind event, it can create temporary rises in water level along the shoreline in a more localized manner. So it's the combination of these two things. So we've reanalyzed the 100-year flood level for historical conditions using measured data at Goderich. So at Goderich there is a water level gauge. We analyzed that water level gauge for each month of the year. And we came up with this table that you can see at the bottom here, which shows on the left or on the first column here different return periods. So for example, the 100-year or the 1 in 100-year water level for each month of the year would come across that row, with the governing one being 177.84 meters right here, most likely occurring in the month of August. And that value is 4 centimeters higher, so just a little bit higher than the last reported historical 100-year flood level, which came from the Ministry of Natural Resources in the late 1980s. And so this statistical analysis of historical water levels gives us the 100-year flood level at Goderich based on historical conditions. But what about other locations within the Maitland Valley shoreline? So to evaluate this, we had to look at storm surge specifically because the static lake level side of things is consistent across the lake, but the storm surge component, when we have these big storm surge events, can vary along the shoreline. So we did some storm surge modeling using a numerical model for a number of historical extreme events to figure out what kind of gradients in storm surge we might have from the north end of Maitland Valley Conservation to the south end along the shoreline. And what we found is that the vast majority of surge events actually approach the shoreline from a somewhat perpendicular direction, and there really isn't a whole lot of variation along the shoreline. So we were able to determine that the historical 100-year flood level of 177.84 at Goderich is an appropriate level for the entire shoreline. Now, this 100-year flood level that we've defined is the historic 100-year flood level. So it's based on the last 100 years or so of data. However, the 100-year flood level for hazard mapping should be representative of the next 100 years, or the 100-year planning horizon. And the provincial policy statement, the 2020 PPS, actually has a clause in it that says planning authorities shall prepare for the impacts of a changing climate that may increase the risk associated with natural hazards. So we need to factor in any changes that we might expect or project in the future in the definition of this 100-year flood level. So in doing so, we know that the 100-year static lake level across Lake Huron has increased 12 centimeters since it was last reported in 1989. This is just the static lake level component of the flood level. So we know it's been increasing. We also know that based on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the latest report in 2018, we know that the global mean temperature increase is likely to be 1.5 to 2 degrees by mid-century. So there's been a number of studies done in this area. The most recent relevant one is a study done by Environment and Climate Change Canada, which simulated lake levels under future warming scenarios. So what we've done for this study is we've used those simulated lake levels for Lake Huron for a 1.5 to 2 degree warming scenario, which is likely a mid-century scenario. We've used those simulated levels and redone the statistical analysis, or repeated the statistical analysis to find out what the future 100-year flood level might be, incorporating that those projected impacts from climate change. And from that, we found that the 100-year flood level for the Maitland Valley shoreline increased to 178.14 based on this modeled future data. So that's a 30 centimeter increase over the historical 100-year flood level. And to get an idea of what that looks like, this is a plot of the Goderich recorded water levels in blue. So these are hourly recorded water levels across the duration of time from 1914 in the bottom left to essentially present day, or 2022 rather. And on the left-hand side here, we can see the actual water level. And we can see that the blue sort of is highly variable to just this period here where we don't have any data. It picks up again in the early 60s, highly variable with a really high lake level period in the 1980s, the mid-1980s. Another one in the 90s, and we had an extended period of lows, and then we ramped up to this more recent period of highs, where we actually just about hit the 100-year historic flood level, which is the orange dashed line. Now, when we include the projected impacts of climate change, which is this additional 30 centimeters, we get up to the red line, which is where we expect the 100-year flood level to be over the next 100 years. And that's the flood level that we've adopted in the hazard mapping for this study. So that covers the 100-year flood level, which is the first component of the flooding hazard. And the second component is this allowance for wave uprush and other water-related hazards. So we also have to define that for the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority shoreline. Now, what is wave uprush? Wave uprush is the landward limit of wave impacts on the shoreline. Specifically, in this case, it could be uprush, or it could be another process called overtopping. And those processes are described in these images, these graphics at the bottom. On the left, we have the classical wave uprush scenario where waves are propagating in towards the shoreline. they're breaking and they're surging up that shoreline. Maybe it's a beach or maybe it's another type of shoreline. They're surging up to a certain elevation that's above the still water elevation. In this case, they're progressing landward a certain distance, and that landward distance needs to be incorporated into the flooding hazard. On this other graphic here, we have the process of wave overtopping, which is when we have a well-defined bank or cliff or a shoreline protection structure that has a crest that's actually being exceeded by the wave uprush elevation. And in that case, the waves are crashing over that crest, and we have overtopping or wave overtopping, which is propagating some distance inland behind the crest of that bank or cliff or shoreline protection structure. And that also needs to be incorporated into the flooding hazard. So we've analyzed wave uprush and wave overtopping where applicable at 62 locations along the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority shoreline in conjunction with the 100-year flood level. And we use that information to estimate this setback, which varies depending on where you are and what the wave uprush and overtopping conditions are. But we've used this information to assess the proper setback of the flooding hazard for the entire Maitland Valley Conservation Authority shoreline. Now that gives you a quick overview of how the flooding hazard is established based on provincial policy and how we've defined it or how we've delineated it for this project, for the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority Updated Hazard Mapping Project. Now, if you'd like to view that hazard mapping, and specifically the flooding hazard, there are a number of ways you can do it. We've produced this flooding hazard in draft and put it online, so it's on the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority website. And if you go to that website, which the link is provided here, you'll find videos, and these are essentially flybys along the shoreline that depict all of the shoreline hazards that we've defined for this project, including the flooding hazard, which you can see in these still images here as the blue surface area. And in that same location on the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority website, you can also find a link to the interactive online mapping tool. There's a couple of examples of it here where you can sort of zoom in and turn on and off different layers and look at the various hazard lines and where they sit on the shoreline for any location within the MVCA watershed that you'd like to look at. So the bottom left image here shows a sample of that mapping for the Goderich area with the blue line depicting the flooding hazard. The red line in this case is the erosion hazard, which is the subject of a separate PowerPoint, which you can go view on the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority website. On the right here we have a still image or a screen cap of this interactive mapping tool for the area around Port Albert. And again, that blue line is the updated draft 100-year flooding hazard line for that area. And so as mentioned, updated draft hazard mapping is available to be viewed on the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority website. You can see that in two ways, one through these flyby recorded animations, but also through the interactive mapping tool, which allows you to look around at specific locations. I also encourage you to review the other two recorded presentations, which you can find on the website, one for the erosion hazard and the other for the dynamic beach hazard. And for any other details on this updated hazard mapping project, please refer to the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority website. Thank you very much for listening.